Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find out more about us at officehours.global. Our first hour is general discussion about media and virtual production. Second hour is usually something we'd like to spend just a little bit more time on. Today, we are very excited to have Brendan Ittelson and Sam Kokajko from Zoom, and Andy Carluccio and Jonathan Kokotajlo from Liminal to talk about Zoom and Liminal coming together and answering your questions about what that means and what that looks like in the future. Of course, we feel like both companies are kind of family, so we're excited to see them all become part of one Uber system. So we're very excited to have them here, and they'll be answering your questions in the second hour. Tomorrow we'll be talking about Office Hours 2.0, where we are, where we're going, how far along we are in that path. And then on Friday we're still doing trends. It's the last day, so we'll talk about media and what we think is going to happen next year. So that'll be Friday. And then of course Saturday is the education hour, or a couple hours that we do from 8 o'clock on. That's only on Zoom. We don't put it on YouTube, so you'll have to be in Zoom for that. All right, let's jump into the questions. Bill, what do we have?
Our first question this morning comes from George E. Kennedy Jr. in Washington, D.C. And George says, how proud is Office Hours community of Andy and the Liminal team?
Go ahead, David.
So I only know Andy by watching in awe, and he has no idea who I am. And yet I found myself over the past couple of days walking around wanting to tell random strangers that my best friend just got acquired and is going to be working with Zoom. So congratulations.
It's great, Mitchell.
As you were just saying, Alex, it's so nice to see a family member of the Office Hours crew do well, and Andy certainly has done well. Through a lot of hard work, he's been promoted to something that's great, and he takes a little piece of us with him when he moves there, and hopefully he keeps a little bit of us at all times.
Go ahead, George.
So on many levels, I'm happy for the Andy and crew. Obviously, they're out of the DC area, so that's one happiness for me and the DC area. This question was posed to the community, but Alex, how are you feeling today? Because this is a community that you brought together. I want to put you on the spot. How are you feeling?
I'm super excited. I think that we couldn't do Office Hours without Zoom and without Liminal. Like it is, we are totally tied into those two companies as far as, this wouldn't exist without those two companies of what we're doing, and the amount of work that we've done with Liminal over the last 6 to 9 months, and almost a year now, and then of course the support that we've gotten and what we've done with Zoom has been really, really amazing. And I think that we have built a community here online that I've just never seen anywhere else ever. And I think that, and I was up early this morning, and it was 3 o'clock in the morning, and people were talking about microphone. Nikki and some other folks were talking about microphones and just kind of, hacking away at it. And I was just like, this is crazy. Like, this whole thing is crazy. And it just wouldn't exist without these two companies. And I think that it's very hard for a large company to be able to be nimble and to be able to take advantage of what I think is going to be one of the biggest opportunities of the next decade, which is how schools teach, how organizations communicate with their customers, and how people build communities. And I think all of those things are things that, bringing in Liminal inside of Zoom is going to give Zoom a vibrance that it already has, but it's going to accelerate that dramatically. And so, I'm super excited. Anyway, next question. I'm sorry, I missed a couple. I told people I wouldn't do that, but I was talking. Go ahead, Liberty.
And I think that it just also speaks to like this being the community where innovation happens, and just watching how Andy was able to come in and share, and people were able to test, and just everything that helped to get them to this place, like uber excited for them.
Go ahead, Blue.
Yeah, I think everybody said it, but I'm super excited for Andy and their team. From a completely selfish perspective, I'm really excited to see what Andy and their team can do now that they have a little bit more inside access to Zoom, and maybe a little bit of drive on the SDK. So super excited to see what's next for Liminal.
Go ahead, Greg.
Sorry, yeah, I just wanted to say, I remember back when Andy, I can't remember whether it was the pre-show or the post-show that Andy first joined in, and the minute he opened his mouth, everybody's head turned. And I can't remember, I think it might have been Grant that he had a little back and forth with about things that they were doing in Zoom. And wow, Andy just grabbed everybody's attention right away. And the nice thing is that he was immediately embraced and accepted into the community, and even bigger, he embraced and accepted the community in return. And it's really nice to kind of see this whole thing come to full fruition through a lot of the efforts that happened here in office hours. And as Blue said, I'm really excited to see what happens now that Andy actually finally has access to that raw audio and video feed that he's been looking for so long.
Yeah, absolutely. And and I think that if Liminal's given the leverage that they need to make the changes that a lot of us have talked about and dreamed about, I think that Zoom will be very hard to catch in this area. I keep on, for some reason, all morning while I've been working away at things, I keep on thinking Wonder Twin powers activate. So anyway, next question.
The next question comes to us from Mitchell Hill in Wilmington, Delaware. He says, as an office hour panelist, the Zoom application would be near perfect if we could find a reliable way to normalize audio for all participants, perhaps a plugin in the architecture?
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
It'd be nice to do, but the biggest problem is you've got so many different microphones. You have so many different audio channels. We're not putting our mouse right up to the microphones to get a constant sound, and so by simply moving heads around, that changes audio like that. If we could ISO audio in the future, and I'm not bringing that in, but that would be the only way to actually do something to make it work.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
I guess I was thinking more in terms of an open architecture on the plugins that could be used to do a master level adjustment with some type of a limiting, like a Wave plugin or an RX7 plugin. The mic technique, of course, what Jeffrey mentions, is something we could do a mic technique test. But it's all about just something that does a better job than just auto.
Go ahead, Rupert.
I just also wonder whether later down the line we might see something in Zoom similar to the request camera control we get for video, whether we might get some request microphone control, something like that.
Yeah, and to be clear, the reason we have trouble with mics is because we're using original audio. When everybody leaves original audio off, the levels are pretty flat in Zoom. Zoom's auto leveling actually does a pretty good job. It's because we're so picky and we turn when it says original audio on, it suddenly Zoom just takes its hands off and it doesn't do any audio leveling, and that is why we have to do it probably more than anyone else. Next question.
Gordon Lake in Los Angeles is up next, and Gordon says, in preparation for the future of production, what are some of the biggest mistakes one can make, and how would you avoid them?
Tobias.
I think a really important thing is to have a test kitchen that's not related to how you make your dollars, and that's going to allow you to risk and learn and try things that might not play in, but might be the key to the next step.
Yeah, when I started this, one of the many reasons that I started office hours was I was getting all these Zoom requests and I didn't know Zoom well enough, and I was like, I better do something every day. Go ahead, Noah.
Try to have some sort of Q2Q or rehearsals done ahead of time, right? So you can practice each step of the process and work that out. Obviously, a workshop like that, like we're talking about, is also great. And that's it for now.
I go ahead, Ari.
I would say failure to understand the objectives of the client. What are the requirements and what do they intend to get out of the show? And not drilling down into logistics, be it especially air, etc., and also not rehearsing enough. And that includes both technical rehearsals as well as involving talent and client.
George?
Be a little bit hands-on. Don't pass on the job to everyone else. Just know what's going on with each and every department.
Good, Courtney.
Don't overinvest in bleeding edge technology, because the market is very fickle and technology changes very fast. And if you invest in a lot of equipment that will become obsolete in a couple of months, you'll never be able to monetize it.
Yeah, I think that the biggest thing that we found is people saying, well, we'll figure that out later, or we'll figure that out when we get there. There's this tendency to not want to deal with details, and that is just lethal. It's just lethal not to get ahead of them, and we can be very annoying a week or two before the event, trying to get every little bit that we need out of it, and that tends to be the thing that if you don't do that, it makes the day that you're doing it much more relaxing. Next question.
Comes from Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas. The game bar is an overlay you can use in most Windows 10 apps and games to take screenshots and record video. To open the game bar, press Windows key plus G. Is this a good way to record a screen video? And if not, do you know a better way?
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, I prefer to use OBS. I don't love the game bar. If I'm getting into like something where I'm doing a training, I use Camtasia Studio. It's been around for quite a while. They make Snagit as well. TechSmith, I think, is the company who runs that. But both those products together, between those, I find myself being able to do whatever I want with it. I love the control over what the quality level, what the frames per second are with an OBS for screen recording.
Go ahead, Courtney.
I advise not using your computer to record the program itself, because your computer can be very busy with doing whatever you're doing, and that ties up a lot of machine cycles and doing that compression. I suggest getting something like this, which is an outboard standalone video capture 1080p and H.264. You plug a USB thumb drive into it or an SD card, depending upon the type that you get, and it gives you a perfectly usable with pretty high bit rate 1080p recording, and you just hit one button to hit record and another button, the same button to stop it, and you have your recording all done, and it doesn't take up your hard drive.
Yeah, I typically am using a second. I use either a Pix 240 or a Pix 5e, which aren't made anymore, but they record in either 1080p or 4K, and I do it for the exact same reason that Courtney suggested. Is that I don't want my computer to think about it. I just want it to think about it as another monitor, but not as another thing that it has to process. Next question.
John Foltz in Selinsgrove, Pennsylvania is up next. I'm teaching a 7-week motion graphics for college broadcast students course in a few weeks. What does the panel think is must-have content?
Go ahead, Alex.
I think you need to tell them the distinction between the different kinds of uses of motion graphics. Title sequences are different from on-screen broadcast graphics, explaining what is where and who is what in terms of sources, or in terms of getting people to stay on a channel when you're switching between channels, which is different from the kind of motion graphics you need to tell us a different kind of story, to get information across, more like information design. So recognize that even though they may use the same typefaces, the same bits of graphic and graphic elements, they need different rules of storytelling. And also consider how After Effects is a monoculture. It's very good in terms of having lots of resources out there, but it's very bad in terms of innovation because everyone's stuck in that same world, a bit like Pro Tools. So consider Cavalry and maybe Motion if you've got Mac users, but don't After Effects are not the only fruit.
Go ahead, Jesse.
I'm going to go a bit more granular on this. I would say motion blur, natural movement with animation curves, and how to handle alpha channels outside of your animation software.
Go ahead, Doug.
Yeah, being a self-taught graphics artist, show them lots of samples of work that you like, and go all aspects, like, do sports like Sunday Night Football, Monday Night Football, and then the big news networks. I mean, those guys spend a ton of time on those graphics. And like Alex said, what are your graphics going to tell? Because the graphics can make or break a show.
Go, Jason.
Motion has recently added a cinematic mode and object tracker. These are very cool things that are pretty easy in Motion. And also USDZ. It's so cool. It needs to be taught somehow.
Chris?
I would not overlook the one thing that most of your students will probably actually work on, and just simple corporate videos. Teach them how to make a bar graph animate, teach them how to make a pie graph animate, things like that. They're going to do that more than, Monday Night Football.
And the other thing is I would definitely have them just look at a lot of other things to aspire to as well. So super sources, lower thirds, sweepers, countdown clocks. I just finished making a really beautiful countdown clock that we're going to use tomorrow. So, but those kinds of things are, those are some core assets there, and really look at everyone else spends a lot of money on these, and what they mostly spend money on is the design. You can get that for free by opening up youtube.tv on your browser and just screen recording all of it and put it into little folders and then walk through it. It is you're getting millions and millions and millions of dollars of R&D and research for free. So definitely use it. Next question.
Comes from Douglas Carmichael, and he says, will the liminal technologies still be as accessible to independent content creators like the Tony Mobleys of the world and artists, and he notes Vimeo, as they will be to larger corporations and media organizations?
I think that this is a second hour question, so it got listed as a first hour. So we'll just go ahead and we'll cancel that and send it back. It just needs to be, that's a second hour. Next question.
David Brady is up next, and David Brady says, I need to rewire my studio setup. Should extra care be taken to keep like signals in similar groups? For example, USB together, audio, video, and so forth.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yes, always separate your AC from your signal carrying wires. Any signal carrying wires should be separated from the AC by at least 6 inches to a foot. And then once you get that far away from them, you'll minimize any interference between the high voltage and the low voltage.
And go ahead, Roscoe.
Exactly what Courtney said. And then any long runs, you try and get into SDI, or make sure you're using balanced mic cable if you're doing a long run.
Rupert.
And then if you have to intersect anything, try and cross it 90 degrees to each other if you have to cross over. And analog audio, you just may want to be a little careful of that, maybe separate that a little more.
Jesse?
Yeah, and for AV over IP or audio over network cables, you really want to take a close look at the shielding and the cable type when you're doing those installation.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from Scott Mueller in Germantown, New York, and he says, what kind of in-ear monitors are you using? Do you use foam, rubber, or custom molded fittings?
And go ahead, John.
I use custom in-ears. I wasn't sold on them for many, many years. I used just rubber or foam, depending on whatever fit my ear best. But after having a set of custom in-ears, I use 64 Audios. They're 6-driver. I can't go back. I can wear them for hours. I can sit on a plane for 8 hours, never take them out, no problem. It's just the comfort level is there for me, and then the isolation is for me. There's nothing better.
Go ahead, David.
I'm not really in need of isolation. I'm mostly doing meetings like this, and so I found the MEE Audio M6 Pros that come around around $50 to be really fantastic.
Go ahead, Liberty.
I've got Shure 215s in, and just a note that it takes a second for them to just curve around your ear, but they've been working fine just for me, and I've got the rubber tips in.
And go ahead, Grant.
Yeah, I got the same as Liberty. I'm super happy with them, and the key to the operation was I use a different size in each one of my ears, and that works really well.
That's crazy. David?
Use the ADV Pro 3 2110. They came with both foam and silicone. I prefer the silicone. The foam kind of irritated my ear canals.
Go ahead, Noah.
I use the Ultimate Ears UE5 Pros. I don't have them today, but that's what I usually swing.
And Hosmuk?
I use the Sidekick from Bumblebee. They fit very nicely, but pricey, very comfortable. You can wear them almost all day. And from a profile point of view, almost invisible.
Yeah, I also use the Bumblebees for a lot of the stuff that I do, especially some of my on-air stuff. For this show, because I want to hear a little bit more detail and a little bit more bass, I'm actually using the KZZS-10 Pros by Lindsay. It took me a little while. They're so sensitive that it took me a little while to get used to them, but I was persuaded to try again, and they're great. Next question.
Scott Mueller is up next from Germantown, New York, and he says, how far should my Logitech Brio be from my face? Would it look better to be closer with a 90-degree field of view than using the digital zoom for 78 or 65 degrees of view?
Go ahead, Grant.
So the philosophy I think about this is that we're trying to make the look and feel of what your Zoom window looks like, your video looks like, to be like that someone is sitting right in front of you. And so anything that distorts that, or particularly like virtual backgrounds, things like that, and doing a 90 degree on the Brio will distorts the image, where the edges look weird, and the middle, it'll squash you in a little bit as well. So I would pick one of the other ones, the 78, something like that. You can zoom in a little bit because they're 4K, and so you've got a little bit of movement there because you're only outputting 1080. But ultimately, think about, how do I want to sit across a table from someone? And what you're seeing on the panel today is a good indication of that.
Roscoe?
Yeah, exactly what Grant said. Too close, you could get some distortion. Mine's about an arm length away right now, so I am that far away. And then it is a crop; it's not a digital zoom, so you're not going to lose any resolution. So I think you're good.
Rupert?
And for some reference, I am 17 inches from mine right now, and I'm on the widest settings, but zoomed in about 15%, something like that.
Go ahead, Alex.
I have mine at 78 degrees, and I'm fingertip distance away. So if I do that, there's the tips of my fingers, and I'm zoomed in one stop at 78 degrees, and that seems to work quite well for me because I need a narrow field of view for my background.
Sky?
Yes, also at reference, I'm one arm length away. I'm also setting it on top of my laptop. I would recommend a separate stand because I do get the jiggle. Also, I'm running it on a Macintosh, which I run the webcam settings, which do allow me to do a little bit of a zoom that I have, but it also gives me the color control.
Next question.
Clive Kirchner is up next from, or it looks like Kitchener, from Bespoke, British Columbia, Canada. Alex, you mentioned yesterday color matching your iDevices to your TV. Are you eyeballing this, or do iPhones and so forth have color profiles?
Well, I do two things with my TV. One is the phone is actually able, with an Apple TV can sync its color with the phone. So you hit, I want to do color correction on the Apple TV in the menu, and you literally take your phone, your Apple phone, your iPhone, and you put it up to it'll give you a little target, and you put it up and it changes all the colors on your TV, and the Apple TV will figure out how to remap that to your TV. so there is a color sync within the TV that does make it actually look significantly better than it did before, or at least more accurate with the Apple TV. So that I do. And at home, my home TV only sees an Apple TV. It doesn't have any other devices connected to it. That's the only way we get content to the TV. So that's part of what makes that work. For the most part, though, if I have my phone at 100% and I don't have any, late night correction on my phone, I will always assume that my iPhone is the most accurate screen in the room. Apple spends a lot of money doing that. And if I don't have someone like Charles who's looking at a truly $11,000 monitor, I'm going to assume my phone, anything under $5,000, I'm going to assume my phone is the most accurate. And so when I look at stuff and something looks really drab or bright or dark on the stream, I'm going to look at my phone and see how it's coming out. And then I'm going to make a decision about where that monitor is from an accuracy perspective. Next question.
Guy Cochran in Seattle, Washington, USA says, can our little old group shape an industry?
Go ahead, Liberty.
Definitely. And it goes back to what we're here for today in the second hour, because our team and everyone who comes to office hours are innovating. They've got questions about what's coming up next. And we have not only the technical folks, we have the marketing folks, we have the business people. So we get a holistic, a 360 view of what's happening. And the more that office hours, it's .global for a reason, that we're touching just all over the earth. So yes, our little old group can change the industry.
Go ahead, Jim.
Office hours was actually kind of the genesis for a product that I'm bringing to market. I think you're crazy not, if you're a developer or a company that develops products in this space, you're crazy not to pay attention to what's going on. It certainly informed me in what I'm doing today.
Go ahead, Blue.
I think the answer to the question is yes, absolutely. Just look at pretty much any virtual event that's out there. Office hours has touched it in some way, shape, or form. And I think you can even look at Zoom events as a platform. And I think that in large part, it was probably driven by some of the early conversations that we had in this group.
Go ahead, George.
So I'm give a little bit of different take on it. And Bill can attest to this. I run a user group in DC called DDC. There's the LA user group. There's Boston. There's SuperMe. There's all of these user groups that requires us to go physically to these meetings. But what office hours has done, we're no longer restricted by time zone or country or continent. We're able to come to one place online. We don't have to worry about flying a presenter into a city to do a presentation. We could do it all here in office hours, at any given time, any location, any part of the continent. So, Guy, to answer your question, yes, we've always shaped the industry by user groups, but office hours is now taking it to a different level.
Go, Jeffrey.
More than just the industry. I'm expecting one day I'm going to walk in and actually have an office hours type style in real life, just in person, everybody behind cameras.
Grant.
Yeah, I think it's too late. I think it already has. And I think that one of the things that we didn't think about initially is the mental health of the people in our community. And it struck me the other day when I logged into after hours and was just hanging out with people, and we were talking, we're just kicking the can on some different ideas, and I thought, there's no reason to be lonely anymore. There's a whole bunch of people that are able to connect. And what happens when people aren't lonely and they connect ideas and that connect to other ideas is that we change an industry.
Yeah, absolutely. Tony?
Little guys can have a quality, high-end show. And I'm going to say this, watch what happens in education.
Yeah, go ahead, Tobias.
Yeah, I think it's bigger than an industry change because, of course, the whole world is going through a paradigm shift. And so there's just a wave of change coming with office hours or without office hours. But somehow we got on the edge of the wave, and it has felt like we're able to direct it a bit, and that's going to affect what I do as a rabbi, what people do in education, like Tony just said. It's much bigger than an industry.
Yeah, I think that I didn't expect such an amazing group of people to keep coming, to show up in the first place in the first week, and then to keep coming and keep building this into something. And again, I talked about it earlier, getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning, watching people have this incredibly geeky conversation. And I was, and I just realized it's really happening 24/7, and I think that if you look at the seeds, the office hours 2.0 that we're testing right now, the Belfast method, the Todd Reynolds project, the Mobley process, all of these things that we're doing, they're all spreading out into these little leaves. The education stuff that we're doing, the cooking, these are all little seeds that are growing out that I think will end up making a huge impact on how we look at not only media but how we connect with each other. Next question.
Next one comes from Alex 40 Golner in London, and he says, how does the panel look in HDR?
Hi, George.
Panel looks great. I've been keeping up on an iPhone with it. I keep it at the bottom out of my shots. The detail, I just watched Tony go by, and his details on the iPhone is crazy. It's insane. And he's only in an iPhone, but it looks great.
Yeah, I think that some people are starting to ping me that are like they're actually watching it on an HDR monitor and they're seeing why I'm so obsessed. so it for the most part it just snaps out in a way that a lot of other most of the HDR content that you see right now that it's not a movie that's live is HLG, and it's kind of watered down HDR, and so we're pushing a lot harder than what most people who put an HDR tag on a live event are pushing, and it doesn't always work, but when it does. Wow. So we're going to have some more fun. Next question.
Next one comes from Jeremy Andrews in Columbus, Ohio, and he says, any tips on getting YouTube or Vimeo to not shut down your stream with copyrighted music? He says, I have a license to use it, but I can't find where to upload that information.
Go ahead, Doug.
I would say use a music service that has plugins or APIs right into YouTube. Like I have one of my sources is Soundstripe. They have a backend system that you can connect your account to YouTube, and then even if that doesn't work or you still get a problem, they have another tool where you just put in your video and hit submit. YouTube does have a very complicated backend system to getting that removed, but just use services that already have that connection with YouTube, and it might suit you better.
Go, Jesse.
This is a tip for getting your copyrighted music cleared on YouTube. Make sure you're talking to the right people. Band members aren't always legal experts. You might have to go to the label to get permission.
Go ahead, Rupert.
Exactly. If you have the permission, it's likely the license holder that will need to approve your channel to stream that out. It's not something you upload. It's something they do.
Yeah. Jesse. I'm sorry, not Jesse. Jeffrey.
And if you're monetizing the video, you got to be more scrupulous about making sure that you get your licenses cleared. If you don't monetize, then there's a chance it could kind of squeak through, and then you could do it after the fact. But don't risk it at all. if you've got like a copyrighted music in there.
Yeah, it's probably one of the reasons that we avoid copyright music whenever possible, is dealing with the paperwork, not the paperwork, but the CMS. So there's a CMS that the copyright holder has in the back end with YouTube. So if you're a true copyright holder, like a record company, it's back there. Now, just because they say it, they can't find it, doesn't mean it's not there. They just don't know how to do it. So they've gotten better. The record companies have gotten better, but a lot of smaller record companies will have trouble with that. But they have to approve your channel to play that song, out there. And we've had literally, Alicia Keys get blocked by her record company, to doing this stuff. So it is a really common problem, but it has nothing to do with your agreements. Your agreements mean nothing unless someone goes into the CMS. And the way to test that is to take the video and nowadays you can just upload it to YouTube, a video with that song, and it will tell you before it even goes up whether it's being clipped or not, and then you'll know whether it's legal or whether it's not legal without a flag. So anyway, next question.
Next one comes from Eric Price in Kansas City, and he says, where are we seeing the most significant impacts of the ongoing chip shortage within office hours communities of interest, and what's the outlook for 2022?
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, so I am seeing from hardware across the board. I have 180-day lead times on network gears currently at the office. Servers are taking a very long time to get in. I am hoping that government contracts are not getting completed and getting sent back to vendors so I can buy them quickly. Desktop computers, laptops, got a 4-month delay right now on laptops that are coming in. So very significant impact for any kind of tech that you're purchasing. Even panels right now, LED panels are very hard to get. Which is then leading to shortages and other devices that I'm seeing.
You go ahead, Andy.
I've been seeing, we just tried to do a major purchase of a wireless mic, new wireless mic systems. Sure, ULXD and Axient stuff just does not exist. But months and months away.
Yeah, and Noah.
The Mix Pre 3 Gen 2, once it was mentioned on office hours, it's nowhere to be found.
Yeah, there's some key chips, because it's not just the general chip shortage. Some of the audio stuff is being still affected by the AKM fire. Next question.
Tobias Moss in Minneapolis, Minnesota is up next. He says, Flow 8 just added a pre-fade option for the monitor outs. What are typical use cases for that?
Go ahead, Jesse.
Yeah, pre-fade is typically used for monitoring systems on stage, but it can also be used for comms or anytime you want to always listen to a particular source regardless of whether or not it's going out to program, and that source is not affected by the main fader level on the console.
Go ahead, John.
I will yield my time. I think that's a full answer.
Andy? Oh, Andy, can you hear me?
Also, ISO records, that just because they label it monitor on the console doesn't mean that that's the only thing you can use it for.
Right. Mitchell?
In the radio business, we call that a queue, so that we can queue the record, queue the newsman, whatever else we need to do. It's just a simple way of getting information without having to reconfigure the console.
Next question.
Next one is Tobias Mox is right back with another one, and he says, assume your Zoom is totally dialed in, 1080p, great connections. Will a restream from Zoom to Facebook or YouTube or one service like that be of equal quality to the direct stream of those platforms?
Go ahead, Guy.
So when you're outputting from Zoom using the custom RTMP or just the YouTube output, it's going to be 720p, unfortunately. So it is going to look a little bit lower resolution. There's ways of getting it out so it looks better. One of them is to screen scrape. So what we do is we NDI it over to another machine, and then we use vMix or a Clearcaster, and that'll bump us up to 1080p into Facebook. Going to YouTube, we'll actually even screen scrape to 4K. So when you're doing, like, let's say a Logic or some app that has lots of tiny text, you can capture all that little tiny text in detail by going to 4K. So different tricks of using the API to get the highest resolution if your needs demand it.
Next question.
Scott Mueller is back from Germantown, New York, and he says, is anyone weary of the long-term effects of Bluetooth headphones being so close to your head? Is there a recommended Bluetooth adapter for in-ear monitors or other non-wireless headphones?
Go ahead, David.
Yeah, I don't use Bluetooth headset, but I have used my old Rode Go wireless in reverse, so that it's kind of wireless from my wired headset, so it works pretty good.
Go ahead, Grant.
Yeah, so I every night I sleep with AirPods Pro in one of my ears, and I haven't noticed any effects at all. I think they've been totally fine.
Go ahead, Noah.
No, I follow that. I don't know about long-term effects necessarily, but I do use something with my in-ear monitors, my UE5s. So this is a Bluetooth that can transmit or receive. It's relatively inexpensive, $36. So I pair that with my high-end headphones, and I think it makes a world of difference, especially on planes or what have you. I can basically keep my phone separate than the transmitter and not have to worry about that cable other than it being ran down the back of my shirt and into my pocket. So it's a good device.
Mitchell?
I'm very skeptical about the power output of a Bluetooth or any kind of wireless device being enough to cook anything brain cell wise in your head. Speaking as a guy that used to work in radio with a 50,000 watt FM transmitter mere feet away from me, I think the consequences of that might be a little more serious, but don't worry so much about that, because there are wireless, microwave, broadcast, satellite, radar, all kinds of stuff that's hitting you right now as we speak.
Yeah, I do admit that I get lots of headaches and earaches with if I put my phone up to my ear, but as long as I put a headset in, I'm fine. But the phone itself causes all kinds of problems for me, so I don't almost ever put a phone next to my head, and I don't have any science for it. It just hurts. Next question.
Next one comes from Jeffrey Powers in Madison, Wisconsin, and he says, best lighting distance to remove forehead glare and still light the subject.
Go ahead, Greg.
So the best distance for lighting is close and large. So the closer a light source is and the larger a light source is to the subject, the softer the light's going to be. And conversely, the further you move a light source away, the smaller it becomes. It becomes more of a point source and becomes a harsher light. One of the mistakes a lot of people make with lighting too is they want to take a light source and aim it directly at the subject. So the softest light that comes off of a light source is around the edges, right? So what you want to do is you want to feather the light off. So you never want to aim the very hot center part of a light at your subject. You want to feather the light off a little bit so that just that edge light is what falls on their face, and you'll get a softer light and less glare.
Good, Courtney.
Yeah, it's not really the distance of the light, it's the position of the light. And your head is a convex dome, which will reflect everything in front of it. So if you get it where it won't reflect at all, it means it's not going to light up your head at all. So, the best solution to remove the shine, specular reflection, would be either to broaden the light source, like was mentioned by Greg earlier, or use makeup. There's some little pads that you can use to blot oil off your face, or use a linear polarizing filter over your camera and the same linear polarizing filter over your lights at 90 degrees to each other. However, that will make your skin take on a different type of sheen, because you can see through the outer surface of the skin, and it looks much more saturated and much more colorful. There's that product.
As you get
Alex
older,
can tell you all about
that. I took mine off because I realized that it was showing a lot more imperfections on my skin than without it, and I did a before and after, and I was like, oh, I shouldn't have done that. Anyway, so go ahead, Noah.
I'll pass. It's covered.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, just a little bit high, and in my case to the left, because I also want to keep it out of my glasses. So if I were to go like this, you can start to see the light fixture kicking in. So you want to find a spot up here, and of course, as everybody said before me, softness and size makes a huge difference.
Next question.
Next one comes from Roberto Barrow in Plymouth Meeting, Pennsylvania. And Roberto says, thank you all for your keyboard suggestions. I bought my wife a Casio CT-X700 for Christmas, and she loves it. She bought me an iPhone 13 Pro Max. What apps do you recommend I download?
Go ahead, Stefan.
Well, an app I use since years is a calendar app, and it's called WeekCal. It's just amazing to use it, and really enjoy that.
John?
My favorite app on any of the phones that have LiDAR built in it is Polycam. Thank you, Alex, for the recommendation.
Yeah. Jason?
All right, so Polycam's been mentioned. I will go with Magic Plan. It's made me a lot of money in the last 2 months.
Very good. Yeah, the other one I would Filmic Pro is a great app for getting video out of it, and I think that those are probably the biggest ones that I would recommend as well. Maybe the Bluetooth Plus for Blackmagic, so if you have a Blackmagic camera. Next question.
Jesse Mills in the San Francisco Bay Area says, has anyone tried a Zoom room machine alongside a Zoom ISO machine so that you have both ISO audio and ISO video respectively?
Go ahead, Grant.
Yes, I have, but not really for audio. You know, it's a funny thing because the audio in Zoom is done so well. Generally, when you get people to you tech check them really well, then I often have a panel of 3 or 4 people, and generally that auto mix that's coming through, I really appreciate. I appreciate not having to ride the faders on that and not having ISO audio. But on the video side, I really like having Zoom ISO and having that super clean, but then having the Zoom rooms and having the gallery view and being able to mix that in and being able to control that from an iPad, you know, so that actually the mix of them works really nicely.
Go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, I've done that as well. And there's an actual NDI pin in Zoom rooms for active speaker, and that works great for bringing in the muxed audio. So if you've got a situation where you need to have, like, you're using Zoom ISO and you need to bring in the muxed audio, you can do it through an active speaker pin. Or in those situations where, let's say you got a bunch of staff or non-participants and you've got to monitor their audio as well, at least during the pre-show part of it. So the active speaker NDI pin works great for that as well.
Next question.
Tobias Moss in Minneapolis, Minnesota is up next. Here at Office Hours, we are just fine with mics on camera. As this becomes more of a norm, do you imagine that mics' visual design will change? To this point, I'm seeing more streamers that have brand colors in their windscreens.
Go ahead, David.
Yeah, I think if it's a program that is driven by branding, it's one thing. But if something like this, everybody had a different windscreen or different colors, it would look like NASCAR or something. On that fact, though, I did buy this mic because it's pretty dope looking. So there you go.
Sounds good too. Go ahead, Noah.
I kind of did the opposite where I went with a darker mic. I like to have it kind of blend in because I don't like drawing attention to it. And I actually like the movement where we've gone towards a more minimalistic look where it's just kind of right in the bottom of your frame. It's a low profile arm, right? Something that you don't see a lot. And I still personally prefer the look of a boom, but obviously the distance you can't make up for. But yeah, I could easily see flags in the future going over mics.
Roscoe.
Mic visual design will change because that's how we know which decade it is. If you look back in time at movies, you will know exactly what's going on by the design of the microphone. So yes, it will definitely continue to change.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
I don't agree with branding equipment. I don't think it makes a bit of sense because the equipment is not to be seen. It's just there to capture the event. And on the equipment that I send out to do a interview or whatever, I don't have my name all over it. I don't think it's appropriate. I think it, like David says, you don't want to start looking like NASCAR.
Yeah, and I purposefully put my mic in the shot to make sure that people see it and realize that it's okay to have a mic in the shot because that means I'm going to get better audio. So for the most part, there are definitely mics that work well outside. In fact, the mic that I'm using now, Chris Fenwick has the same mic, and he has it out of frame and he sounds just fine. I put it in more as a, see, there it is. But I like the fact that you see it and it tells everyone that that's going to be okay to put your mic in there because I want people to do that because for most mics in most environments, it doesn't work. Next question.
Rodrigo Munoz in Stockholm, Sweden is up next, and he says, have you tried live streaming with an HLG-capable camera like the GH5 or others, or HLG-capable monitors like the Atomos, and how does your chain look at that point?
So generally, the main thing is that as long as the delivery service or the monitor is getting tagged and knows that it's seen HLG, it should work fine. HLG doesn't require any metadata, so that's the big trick with HLG, and that's why it's both not quite as good as HDR10 or Dolby Vision, but it's a very basic curve that's just being applied, so it works in SDR or HDR. It kind of comes through that system, and so. It's a relatively easy thing to push through a pipeline, so you should be able to get it there. I don't use HLG because my pipelines are built around HDR10 and Dolby Vision, and I just have a hard time getting it to work as well. And I just think it doesn't look as good. So I don't have a lot of experience with HLG, but it should work if you're plugging it straight in. It's just a matter of whether any component between your camera and your monitor is doing some other transform, like tagging into 709, which would cause a problem. Next question.
Samuel Nordvik, coming to us from Norway, is up next, and he says, does anyone have experience with the YouTube integration in Bitfocus Companion?
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
There's a few of these out there. Some of them are on GitHub. My response to that is, if you're in your own network using Companion, you're going to have a lot better experience than if you try to send it out to the internet. To start and stop a stream, I would never do that. Something simple like, hey, this person followed, something like that. That's perfect for that. But other than that, yeah, I'd use it sparingly.
Next question.
Olivia Richard in Saigon, Vietnam is up next, and he says, GoTo Meeting is cropping the 1080p from my Atem Extreme to 720p. I use another Atem Mini with the DVE feature to scale down the output program. Is there any way to avoid the second Atem?
You get a web presenter. Or something that's going to import it. GoTo Meeting. It took me a little while to realize what GoTo Meeting was doing. I get called into a meeting about once a month with GoTo Meeting, and it's always painful. Like you're not sure if it's actually going to work, and you don't know what's going to happen. But I always look really zoomed in, and I couldn't figure out what it was. And the way I fix it is that I use one of the older web presenters, which you can sometimes get on eBay. I just run my switcher into that as the input. But you need something that's going to feed it and look like a webcam. The best thing to have is look like a webcam and not have it try to be anything else. GoTo Meeting is old. So anyway, so don't try to trick it. Don't try to do anything funny. The web presenter works really, really well because it just looks like a web 2.0 or a USB 2.0 web camera to GoTo Meeting. It's nice and simple, and it will go in and you will look the way you expect to look, even with a 4K camera, because the web presenter is doing the work for you. But otherwise, just try to be gentle with it because it's fragile. Go ahead, Noah.
That's definitely the best way to do it. Another workaround would be, well, maybe it would work, is using OBS and virtual camming from there.
You could. When we use OBS as virtual cameras, I have to admit there's just a lot of sync issues. That's the biggest thing, the biggest challenge that we get into. It's just that it's not a great. If you're doing it on a PC, maybe it works better. On a Mac, the sync issues are intolerable. The audio sync issues. It just really is. We don't find it to be a viable solution. Next question.
Winky in India is up next. Says, has anyone on the panel successfully executed remote video production with synced musical performances from artists located in different locations using NDI services or solutions like Medialooks, etc.?
Go ahead, Grant.
The way that I have done something is I used a simple Zoom call where I had half a string quartet playing, and then they were coming into a studio where we had an audience, and then we had the other half of the quartet, and they played along with the first half. But what that meant is that the first half didn't hear the second half, right? So it was actually just, and I call it playing trains. Right, where you start the train and then you add to the sound and then you create the end sound, but you don't give that back to the original group, and that's because we just have a problem with latency, and that was in the same city, right? But we still have latency, and that was going to be a problem. But really, ultimately, I asked the question because I've done a lot of musical performances at other times that are either pre-recorded or they all exist in one location, and then you jump to the next location and do something else completely different. So all of those other ways of doing it are going to come across some sort of latency issue.
Go ahead, Todd.
There are two ways of thinking about this that fire to me. One is that, excuse me, in what Alex referred to earlier as the Todd Reynolds Project, we have a team which executes what the equivalent of musical performances synced would be. And that's one musician and two video artists who are providing reactive visuals. And we do that. And I waited a long time to put my hand up for this question because you asked about NDI specifically or Medialooks. We actually are doing it a completely different way. than those. So I can't say that we've done that. So that's the negative answer to your question. The other way to consider this, as Grant was mentioning, is you might want to take a look at Dan Tepfer's FarPlay, FARPLAY, in terms of a way of actually playing almost in sync across great distances. That's just come out recently.
Yeah, and we've done it. We did a bunch of this about 10 years ago, and we did it over Hangouts. And what we ended up doing are two different ways. One is to have one choir end with a long note and the other choir come in over top of it, which to the audience sounded perfect. You know, like, and we went across Canada, from Montreal to Toronto to Calgary to Vancouver, and the audience was out of their mind. That they thought it was really the coolest thing, and it was very easy. So the other way that we did it was with a global sync track, which is that we had them sync to a global track, and so they didn't hear each other at all. They just played to the click track that was local to them. The problem with that is that there's changing latency between the inputs, and so while it worked to some degree, it definitely was not. There were certain instruments that you could use and certain instruments that you couldn't, depending on how, like things that are pop 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 you can't use, things that are long you can, or we found that they worked out better. Next question.
And next one comes from Andy Dolph in Durham, New Hampshire, and he says, favorite inexpensive ways to light a background with color. The backdrop is only about 3 feet behind my back of my chair, and I'm in a pretty cramped room.
Go ahead, Greg.
So I haven't done this myself, but I heard this great tip on some program the other day. I think it was called Office Hours or something like that, where somebody mentioned taking the adhesive-backed LED strip lights and putting them on the back of your chair. And especially if you're in a cramped location where you've only got 3 feet from your background, that might be a great solution for getting some colored illumination on your background.
Yeah, Stefan?
Yeah, I use these Nanlite power tubes, second generation Model 6C. They're quite inexpensive and very good to configure. Thing of my choice.
I have a large collection of those. Go ahead, Mitchell.
It's a little counterintuitive, but you should also use a background that's dark. The darker the better to get that saturation from the light, so you don't have to pump a huge amount of light on it, particularly if it's a dark background. It'll absorb the saturation of the color and present you with a much better, easier, and less expensive background.
Yeah, and I'm using a gray background. That means that any light that I throw on it will kind of just fill in, as opposed to white, I'd have to push it really hard, and black, I'd have to push it hard as well. So I find that the medium tones work pretty well. Go ahead, Sky.
Yes. Again, third or fourth vote up on the Nanlite. The proximity, I'm literally 18 inches away. And while I don't have it currently, the Amazon Santa has just delivered my $71 Nanlite. So we'll see it soon.
Next question.
Scott Mueller's next from Germantown, New York. And Scott says, how many models back does the color accuracy of iPhones and iPads go? Do I need the very latest device to get the standard of color do you talk about?
Go ahead, Noah.
So the older a display gets, the less it'll be accurate as far as the calibration goes. That's why on professional monitors, they often recalibrate those screens. So basically, you're running a risk the older that phone gets.
Mm-hmm. Good, Roscoe.
As far as the actual age to do like the monitor calibration through an Apple TV, you can use an HD Apple TV. It has to run the OS 14.5, but the iPhones go all the way back to Face ID, about 5 years old, whenever the X's came out. So you have to have an iPhone X or newer in order to do that calibration.
Go ahead, Grant.
Yeah, HDR10 and Dolby Vision goes back to the iPhone 8. So it supports that. So that helps.
Yeah, I found that until we got to iPhone 10 is when I started to go, okay, this is something I can really pay attention to, but it is available from 8 and 9. And that's why when we talk about HDR, most of us are talking about Apple devices, is because Apple has been doing this. All the other, like Android and Windows, are kind of just starting, and Apple's been doing it for 5 years. And that's just the reason that it's so much more stable on the platform. Next question.
Next one comes from Hasma Kajar in Cape Town, South Africa. He says, Andy and Zoom news has most certainly added excitement to the community. In after hours yesterday, we at one stage hit 97 folks in the meeting. Are we now at the point where after hours will scale and need the portal to office hours for newcomers?
Go ahead, Hasmuk.
Yeah, as after hours OG, if I may say so. I I thought of Kami yesterday, and I was urging that number to hit 100. So it kept on going, 96, 97. I said, three more, please. And then we'll hit 100. So that we may have hit a higher number while we sleep in South Africa. But I thought it was very significant yesterday that so many folks were in after hours.
Yeah, I think that the kind of post-show breakdown and discussion has turned out to be pretty popular. I don't know if I can do that after Christmas break, but it is has turned out to be a pretty exciting time to be in after hours. And so we haven't hit 100 yet, but we have gotten to 98, I think, before as well. So we'll see. If we do it consistently, then we'll start to think about what happens next. Go ahead, Grant.
Yeah, I think it's great to acknowledge and to keep an eye on numbers and to see how the community grows. But I think the two things that kill communities, one is when it's closed. A closed group is a dead group. And the second thing is when you focus on the numbers and you focus on trying to build it and trying to get new people, and it starts to kill it. The best thing that we can do is be a great community and be welcoming to new people, and we'll continue to grow.
Absolutely. And you'll find that I'll add more friction to after hours, not less, as we make office hours more and more public, as we start to put it into a lot of different platforms. You'll probably see the after hours link drop away from the daily thing, and everything will be, it'll be a little harder to find. And the reason for that is mostly that I believe that friction to joining is actually a key way to improve the quality of the community. And so I want the people who get there to be working at it. Now, the numbers are only important to me in the sense that they are signals that we have to start figuring out how to serve more audiences at one time. When we're consistently all day over 100, not when we tap 100, but when we're over 100 all the time, we have to figure out ways to serve other folks. And so that's when more breakout rooms will happen and other things like that. But it's all dependent, on that number staying there consistently throughout the day for me to start thinking about that process. Next question.
Sarah Doyle in Falls Church, Virginia says, any suggestions on high throughput firewalls for streaming?
Go ahead, John.
I use at home a PA220. It's by Palo Alto. Gets you about 500 megabits of throughput, which should be solid enough for any kind of streaming that you need to do. It does level server filtration at that level, so you can do anything you want to do, even SSL inspection if you really wanted to go down that path in your home network.
Yeah, and we use Meraki's, and they are able to handle it at the right level as well. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's back, and he says, in the live sound community, I've heard of engineers themselves purchasing high-end consoles like the Digico SD Quantum series, Yamaha PM7s, and so forth. How do they justify such an expensive capital investment as an individual professional?
Go ahead, Jesse.
There are. Which
right
Jesse?
ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry, Jesse Mills. Sorry, This is the first time. That's our first dual Jesse answer that we've had in the history of the thing. Go ahead, Jesse Mills.
Totally. One justification would be that you need to have the piece of gear on hand all the time. It's a different world where it's harder to acquire gear, and of course, no matter what your specialty is, if it's live sound or camera or production sound or whatever, you have certain bits of gear that are your primary tools that you really need to have an intimate knowledge of. So as far as financially, how you can justify that, typically I'd try to say if I can pay this off in 3 or 4 upcoming productions that I already have on the books, then it's a go. But I will never put myself in the hole too deep on a big purchase.
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, for me, for what we've done, it's all about how many times would I have to rent it? What would the cost of that be? And what's the ROI? It makes it a pretty easy case when we're purchasing any type of new gear. When it comes to specific consoles, really the rider drives everything. So what acts I'm bringing in are going to drive what consoles I purchase, and that's going to drive the ROI on those investments.
Go ahead, Jesse Coaster.
A totally different way to justify an investment is how I justify shooting on film. It's because I love it.
There you go. Go ahead, Sky.
I did this with the video version of a very expensive editing software and hardware combination because it was the only way I could get access to it. And I needed that muscle memory of doing and doing and doing. And it also allowed me the permission to be hired by others because they had that equipment but they didn't know how to use it. And I had the practice and the knowledge of how to get around in it.
Courtney?
Yeah, most everything's been mentioned. The way, to amortize a piece of professional business equipment for tax purposes over a period of years can give you a good deduction and lower your taxes. And also it gives you familiarity with the equipment so that you become a real professional at it, can spend hours learning it. And then when you show up, you know more how to run that equipment than anybody else. And it also gives you rental income. So there's 3 reasons to buy it.
Yeah, and for the highest end ones, we haven't chosen to buy most of our stuff, but we do get up into the QL5s and CO5s, because all the reasons there that we were able to rent it. But you have to just know that you have enough throughput to make sure that it's going to pay off in a reasonable amount of time. So usually we focus on that pretty intently. All right. We are changing subjects. All of us are pretty excited to have the Zoom and Liminal teams here, joining us here for our second hour. And so it's this has been, we of course couldn't do this community without our friends at Zoom. Zoom was the perfect platform for what we were doing when we first got started. We tried it on other ones. We had a bad day on Zoom one day. There was some internet issues, and we all went to Google Meet. We were like, everybody go here, and we all went over there, and it was horrible. What I got very clear of is that wasn't ever going to that was never going to work. So that was part of the issue there, and then. Amazingly, Andy showed up one morning. It was the most classic scene because Andy just happened to show up when Grant was showing people how Zoom OSC works, and it was just the best. It was just, and there was no planning. Grant obviously did not know who Andy was because Andy was giving Grant little inputs, and then Grant was like, "This is my first rodeo, buddy," and it was just and then Andy just really became part of the community, truly part of what we do, to the point where for a year we've had this. And Jonathan has been, also just really become an important part of everything that Andy and Jonathan have been doing, coming out to the office, working with us on 2.0, Andy putting together the Isadora stuff, Jonathan building this incredible front face for it in Universe. Is that team, the Liminal team, has just really become something that is really part of not only our recent past, but our future, and so that's been, we've been super excited about that. And so anyway, we're really excited to have both Andy and Jonathan. So Andy Carluccio and Jonathan Kokotajlo, of course, from Liminal, as well as Brendan Ittelson and Sam Kokajko from Zoom. Will he be here? Hopefully they'll be here soon. We're jumping in a little early here. So we'll have we're excited to have everybody on, and we're going to start with the questions here. So, by the way,
Alex, Sam and Jonathan are on page 2. They're here in the panel.
Oh, got it. Okay, great. This page 2 thing is throwing us off there.
Threw me off too.
Yeah, exactly. And Brendan's here as well. For the folks that had questions that were in there, and we pushed them back to your notes. If you're new to what we do, they're in your notes section in Mukana. We didn't throw them away. You can bring them back tomorrow. But otherwise, we're just going to dive right into it. But the first thing we want to do is ask Andy and the Liminal and the Zoom team. You guys can figure out how you want to talk about it. But can you tell us a little bit about how this actually came about? You want to start, Brendan?
Well, first off, it's wonderful to be here on office hours, speaking with everyone today, and sharing more and answering your questions. In terms of the story, I actually think probably it's best for Andy to kick this one off.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously, we through the office hours community took a major pivot towards event production and the way that we use the Zoom SDK to serve this specific type of deployment. We really specialized with Zoom OSC and Zoom ISO at that point. And I think that really through a lot of our outreach, through office hours, the Zoom Test Kitchen, AV Tech Talks, we took a more public angle on what we were doing. And I think that's where we began to really engage with with Zoom itself as an organization, both through SDK level support conversations, talking about, hey, this is working really well for us. This is where we might need some help to be able to deploy a new tool for the event production community here. So we started to spin up a really productive relationship on that front. We looked a lot at like business level as well, like, hey, how are our strategic objectives for event production aligning with what Zoom is doing? How can we be complementary to each other? And then I think this was sort of the natural progression of that, is that joining forces, for lack of a better word, was really a way to offer a complete value chain for all the things that both portfolios of products could offer.
And from Zoom's side, what made Liminal interesting for this process?
Well, in terms of on the Zoom side, it's one of those items that we have been focusing really on our event business, and we see Liminal as a strategic step in the progress that we have been making in that, and continuing to invest in that area. So exciting to see what we can do together to really add to the event management and production offerings that are available through Zoom, whether it's creative production, broadcasting, editing, or live experiences. We really want that end-to-end solution for our customers. And so this is just another resource to help, make a complete solution that folks love and can use every single day.
Sam, how do you see the Liminal partnership? How do you see that impacting what you do in events with Zoom?
Yeah, so I mean, it's just going to make everything about what we're doing easier, because it's stuff we were already using. I remember where I was, I think it was a bit over a year ago, when Brendan actually messaged me going, hey, look at this. Have you seen this link yet? To go look at Zoom OSE for the first time. And digging in on like how, like on a personal level, how much I kind of connected with that, because it's like, I kind of grew up doing the same thing that I've seen Andy and Jonathan doing, of like hacking together solutions to get access to be able to hit buttons with other systems and build automations between them. And like, that's always been my bread and butter, and kind of why my team is doing what we're doing here at Zoom now. So really, it was very natural for us to kind of jump onto that bandwagon and be really digging in on this system that's going to let us use Zoom the way we need to use it, but then give us access to all those buttons and switches and all the different ways that we can start to build actual workflows and kind of make it really work well.
And Jonathan, what do you think that the Zoom brings to Liminal as you become part of that?
Yeah, for sure. One thing I'm looking forward to is the fact that Zoom has a very active event services team, which is constantly working on productions. And although on Liminal we did do productions of our own, and we did have a very tight relationship with you guys and with the larger community of video event producers, it's going to be nice to work more directly with a team that can give that feedback back and forth about what new features need to be added, how can we take integrations and custom interfaces, and how can we build those out. Again, Zoom ISO, Zoom OSC, these are technologies that the philosophy behind them is to have a foundation layer, to have something that is just giving you base access and controls and integrations, and then you build a system based on that. Just like we saw with the Office Hours 2.0 system, which is taking the Zoom ISO core, the Zoom OSC core, and then adding all these additional features and integrations to it. Those are the kinds of things that I'm looking forward to doing at Zoom. And I think there's a synergy there, which is hopefully going to lead the charge and show the rest of the industry and show the rest of you guys what's possible using Zoom and some of the new technologies from Liminal.
Yeah, I have to say, as Office Hours 2.0 gets closer and closer to the surface, and right now we're probably weeks away from flipping it. What I keep on getting to is I think that we're going to end up building shows that are better than if we were there in person. Like I'm not interested, the idea that, oh, by the way, I can build all the super sources with Zoom ISO and OSC. I can build all the super sources automatically. Doing that in the real world, much harder, and if you have, and we've gotten into this system where we're used to 15 or 20 panelists. If anyone told me, think about 15 or 20 panelists on a stage trying to have a reasonable conversation. And we just did this for an hour with 30 or 40, over 30 panelists, and it just boom, 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 boom. We could never do that in the physical world. And so I think that what we're doing with Zoom, and then what we're seeing with Zoom ISO and Zoom OSC, I think the fact that it's going to have more access to the core and having engineering support, I'm pretty excited. Anyway, so we have a ton of questions, coming your way. So we're going to head through them. Just go ahead and just jump in. It's just between the four of you, just jump in as needed here. Let's go ahead with the questions, Bill.
Absolutely. The first one this morning comes from David Brady in New York City, and he says, will the technologies acquired be expanded upon and available beyond the Zoom event services offerings?
So I just wanted to clarify this because it talks about Zoom event services. And I guess one thing I just want to touch on is that the Liminal acquisition, while Jonathan is coming to work for event services, Zoom OSC, Zoom ISO are not going to be at all limited to Zoom event services. You saw me say the same thing when I came here and started talking about the Zoom events conference type, that me and Greg went back and forth on this one, that we are not intending for any of these things to be gated behind event services. That's not what event services is here for. Event services is not a prereq to any special access at Zoom. It's just really great services.
Because fundamentally, it's not scalable that way. Yeah, absolutely. Next question.
I think it's good to maybe, Alex, before we move on, just to sort of recap what the actual structure is here. So you've got, as Sam alluded, Jonathan will be joining event services, taking a lot of the parts of Liminal that were event and custom interface and services oriented and bringing that over to that portfolio. I'm joining the engineering side, and I'm working on more of like the product focused things. So things like we did with Zoom OSC and Zoom ISO, looking at those workflows and capabilities and how we affect engineering sort of as a whole on that vertical. So that same sort of parallel that we had at Liminal, where products were informing services and services were informing products, and we were building the possibilities together, we've been able to maintain that structure, which is something I'm really, really excited about on the Zoom side, that we have that synergistic relationship between engineering and the services.
Absolutely. Let's go to the next question.
Tlaloc Miguel Lopez Waterman from Jim Hogg County, Texas is up next. And he says, what does the future of Liminal look like?
Go ahead, Andy.
Sure. Yeah. So it's definitely, it's Zoom, right? So this is, this asset purchase is a substantive merge of our capabilities together, right? So Zoom OSC and Zoom ISO Streamweaver, those are under the Zoom portfolio. Like I said before, the services that we had provided are going to be available through event services now. So we're going to be starting to take a look at some of those things that we had been doing in this community, those custom Isadora interfaces, Universe, how that ties in. Like Jonathan was saying, all the things that you build on top of the Bedrock platform, that's the products basically, right? So if you think about Zoom OSC and Zoom ISO as being those windows into getting those different video feeds or getting those controls, then the next layer is building the custom Isadora interfaces, the Universe controls, the Stream Deck companion workflows, those sort of things that stack on top of that. So I think that what you're looking at is sort of the validation of a lot of those things that we had been doing and the integration of those philosophies and workflows. And I'm going to keep emphasizing the workflows here. It's like you were talking about a couple of days ago, Alex. The thing that's so important is understanding the how of something, right? Not necessarily the specific program or the specific, chain of things that are occurring, but the general philosophy of how things are done and the workflows behind them. And I think you're going to see those liminal workflows become more important versus less important as we start to join the forces here.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question.
Chris Taylor in Carlsbad, California has pragmatic. How soon will we see Zoom Audio ISO?
Go ahead, Sam.
So it exists already in Zoom Rooms. Zoom Rooms NDI has isolated audio output. If there's any, I don't think there's any more to that answer.
Is there ISO for as many people that are in the? Will it if there's 30 people in a Zoom event? Will it pull all 30 ISOs?
For Zoom Rooms, you can only do 3 ISOs out at a time. And so you would end up needing multiple Zoom Room endpoints, each of which could pin up. It's essentially a pin farm, but it's actually a working pin farm. You guys have heard me before complain about, I really, really, really don't like multiple computers joining the same call because of the audio issue. Because if you're dealing with mixed audio, I'd never want to have audio from one computer, video from another computer, and ultimately they're not necessarily guaranteed to be in sync. But when you have isolated audio like this, all bets are off.
Right. Oh, absolutely. Next question.
Tlaloc is right back with another one. How will Zoom OSC Pro licenses be handled moving forward?
Go ahead, Andy.
Yeah. So there's the good news is there's really very low change here. There's nothing of substance that's changing in terms of pricing or availability of Zoom OSC and Zoom ISO right now. So if you're currently a Zoom OSC Pro subscriber, that's going to continue to renew on the monthly subscription model. And so you won't see any changes there. The annual model is no longer available right now, and we'll be talking about how we're going to look at that in the future. But there's no change in access in terms of your everything that you had been doing, you will continue to be able to do. Same website, same download, same pipeline. The distribution's all the same for you guys.
Next question.
Well, and actually one thing to go ahead and add to
Sam.
that I don't know if we've actually specified this to the group yet, but customer support. We're still selling a product, so you still need to be able to have support. Customer support is actually going to roll under me as well. It's going to be the same people that were doing it. So customer support is not changing. You still have access to the same methods that you had before. And that's going to continue for the near future here.
And that's the best support you can get, is the ones that are actually using it. so that's great. Next question.
Carluccio also has the third highest rated in our panel today. And so he asks, what should productions that are currently relying on a Zoom OSC workflow expect in the next year?
Go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, I can say, I think this would be a good one for all of us to sort of round robin. I like that Talok picked up the workflow component of it as well. Like, again, these are Zoom OSC and Zoom ISO available for the foreseeable future. You can still build on top of them, and you'll be building good architecture. And again, the idea of the workflow is becoming more important. Again, exactly what form and shape, I think those are things that you'll see over the course of the next year, what we're planning to do with them. But the philosophy that you can use Zoom as a contribution platform for broadcast, the idea that you can tie in external systems and have them communicate with the platform, those things that you can do today with the Zoom OSC and Zoom ISO apps generate a workflow that I think is going to become increasingly important as you look at how you do remote contribution through the Zoom platform.
Yeah, Jonathan, how do you see it impacting the future?
Yeah, I definitely agree with what Andy said. I think it's been a priority to us to make sure that for the next month, for the next 6 months, for the next year, that these solutions that we've been working hard over the past year to make available to you guys are still made available as best as we can. Whether that's through the same distribution of the same Zoom OSC and Zoom ISO, or whether there's additional features or capabilities in the future, those are all priorities to us. And I'm very excited on Zoom events as well, is to really pioneer new workflows, test and refine and keep on working to compact systems, working to find cheaper alternatives, working to make things more accessible, and then sharing some of that with the broader community. Again, we've had Office Hours 2.0, we've had all these setups that have been shared, and everyone's been finding their own way to accomplish these objectives. And we've all been moving towards building off of Zoom OSC, building off of Zoom ISO, and making these compact systems. And I think that there are certain workflows from that which we can really use the synergy working with Zoom to present new options and new capabilities, both with old Zoom ISO and with new features to come.
And Brendan, do you have a kind of a from a 10,000 foot bigger vision of how you see these things coming together?
Definitely. I mean, I'm very excited by what Zoom has done to make access to these features available and accessible. And so looking at bringing in the liminal technology into the Zoom platform and, continuing to drive on our focus of making it an open platform that folks can easily integrate with and optimize their workflows in an easy manner is something that we are continuing to focus on. And this will continue in that tradition. So I'm very excited about where people will be able to take their production now and continue to elevate it as we're able to work closer together and deliver more options for the community as it comes across the product suite.
Sam, how do you see it affecting your both near and far event structures?
I mean, I think so far the other three have nailed it pretty well. That as we're going forward, you're just going to see it I've always said it as kind of these two paths where the native product is making additional things that you can do in the events available to you right there within the product. Simpler, making just kind of one-upping what it's able to do. And at the same time, we're one-upping what you're able to do if you're willing to put in the work and willing to tie in these external systems and stuff. Like you said earlier about man, we just had a panel with 30 people. We never could have done that in the old world. And that's kind of what we're seeing, that I don't even know what the next set of shows looks like. I just know that it's going to be getting better, and that both ways are both going to be continuing to improve.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about it since the announcement, and just really thinking about the amazing ways that we can reorder audiences from 1,000 people to 5 to 100, and be constantly, moving them around instantly so in a 1 hour, 2 hour, 5 hour period, completely changing that structure. And the mixture of the two technologies is the only way to do that. And so really, really excited.
And I think to that point, Alex, you also now with this merge have to look at the entire value chain now that Zoom has in its portfolio. Because through something like Zoom Events, right now you have the ability to construct an event, build itinerary for your participants, which was great, and it's sort of the foundation step one, right? And then you also had, through the APIs and the different tools that were available, you can get analytics about how the event went, what was successful. And then in our portfolio, we had, okay, after you've done the scheduling and while your people are moving around, when you actually get into the meeting, get into the webinar, what are the tools to actually help you produce? So now when you look at it all together, you've got the pre-event planning, the in-event management, and the post-event analytics all together in a synergistic chain, all offered through the same company, which is really exciting.
And I think that's like one of the most short-minded things we could possibly say at this point, is to be looking at it and saying like, oh man, Zoom bought the Zoom OSC asset. What does that mean? It's not about the Zoom OSC asset. That's a big part of it. It's about taking these minds and putting them together, and what can we build for the future.
And I can tell you from firsthand experience of them being in my office working on stuff, it is an amazing set of minds that you've brought into the company. I mean, I was just always stunned when Jonathan and Andy are sitting there figuring out these really complex problems that we're doing and trying and pulling those together. And I just think that it's kind of the perfect mix. And for as producers, as people who do this, one of the things that I'm really excited about is the idea that there's a place for us to solve clients' bespoke requests in a very powerful way. So you have, the Zoom meetings and Zoom webinars and Zoom events. And then there's this other world where we can handcraft an interface for the client, handcraft behaviors for the client, which is what we're doing with Office Hours 2.0, where we have Universe with an interface that anybody can open up, and we're constantly tweaking it. And then we have Isadora, where we're creating all these behaviors, and we're constantly tweaking it. And we're constantly able to develop something that would make no sense to Zoom to build on its own. And so having these tools and having them get deeper and deeper into the system, where we have more access to that, is a huge opportunity for us as producers, because it means that we're going to be able to go out, and Zoom is the platform, but we're going to be able to build things that work exactly the way we want them to work, or the way our clients want them to work. Let's go to the next question.
The next one comes from Rupert McRae in Dallas, Texas, and Rupert says, a common use of Zoom OSC is to integrate external control surfaces like the Elgato Screen Deck into Zoom. Might we see more features like this rolled into Zoom directly, particularly for accessibility?
Go ahead. Greg, do you want to add something to that before the guys jump onto it? Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, let's let them answer it, and I'd like to come back at the end.
Okay. Yeah. Go ahead, Andy.
Again, I think the workflows, again, are the critical component here. The idea that, as we were just discussing, person A and person B might have completely different needs for how they use the Zoom platform to achieve something, but having the ability to hook in, like we did with Zoom OSC, so that somebody's Stream Deck can be laid out one way, somebody else's Stream Deck can be laid out a different way. It's a very, in terms of button arrangement, that's a very specific case. Obviously, we're talking about the ability to build all sorts of complex behaviors, even things that are input-output pairs. Like, I'll never forget when I was working with Jeff Widgren on the ability to just create a multi-spotlight of people who unmute themselves. So as people are unmuting themselves, they're joining visually into the conversation, right? The ability to build customized behavior on top that, again, it doesn't require Zoom to directly build every possible circumstance and case. The philosophy of openness is what actually attracted me to the Zoom platform in the first place, right? Like, it was the ability that I could sit down and download the SDK and build something for the theater community, within a couple of weeks. It was the only platform that had that much of an open architecture that somebody could tie in and really get the guidance that was needed to do that. So I think you're already seeing that these open philosophies are core principles. It's the way that Zoom handles development and deployment. And I think, I'm excited to see what, between Brendan and Sam and the other folks, what's on the horizon there. But I think you're seeing a lot of really good signals in terms of the way that Zoom approaches this stuff.
Yeah, and we've seen it already. I mean, I think that Zoom is the most open architecture that we've seen, and as far as how we're going to put this stuff together. So it's exciting. Greg, you wanted to add something to it?
Yeah, I just wanted to get my feature request in now. I want to get a companion module for the Zoom Room controller so that we can control the Zoom rooms and do our NDI pins right on our Stream Decks. I can just tell you from experience that there were times that Zoom ISO was a better tool for me for NDI pins over Room NDI sometimes, and it was specifically because of workflows that Andy had created. And so there were just times that being able to use workflows that Andy made where I could just pin and repin and rebuild panels on the fly from my Stream Deck. That's a powerful feature, and really, I'd really like to see that Zoom Room controller have a companion module.
Next question.
Johnny Estias in Manila in the Philippines is up next. He says, will the Zoom OSC ISO companion module remain open source now that Liminal has transitioned to Zoom?
Andy?
Yeah, again, no changes in distribution or how things are managed. And one of the cool things about Bitfocus Companion is that it is an open architecture. So all of the providers who are contributing to this platform are doing so in an open source way. And that's fundamental to the way that Companion is done. So no changes from us on that. I think to Greg's point, Companion was also a really critical part of the Zoom OSC story, where it was Zoom OSC itself, not to discredit it to any degree, but it was an interface. You don't do anything by just opening Zoom OSC and leaving it. Like you tie it to something, you build out some front end for it. And Companion was by far the most popular pairing because it let you do things like put the names of the people on the keys and have the color be the indication of video state or audio state, and then be able to press them and treat it like a matrix if you were using Zoom ISO. So all of those things were really fundamental. And I think that Companion is not something, that is sort of a last consideration for me. It's something that I'm thinking of very actively about how the Stream Deck ties into, just because of how ubiquitous it is, how it ties into the types of workflows that Zoom OSC and Zoom ISO are using.
All right, let's jump to the next question.
James Hutchinson is up next from Dublin, Ireland. And James says, to the Zoom team, how and when did Liminal first pop up on your radar? What was the trigger that made you realize you wanted this brilliant team to come in-house? And what's the first thing you'd like to release?
I think we'll start with Brendan on that one.
It's a great question. I mean, the Liminal team popped up very early as a SDK developer, because we're very much in touch with folks that are developing on our platform and like to see what they're doing, how they're pushing the envelope, and listening to their feedback through it. So along that collaboration and talking about what the future was, where they were going, and looking at where our roadmap was going, we definitely saw synergies and an opportunity where it was better to collaborate and bring them closer in-house. So I think it's been a very exciting journey going through that process.
Sam, when did you realize that this is something that you thought that Zoom should pull in-house?
Well, I already mentioned earlier that I remember where I was when Brendan first sent me the link. But I remember opening the link, and I remember getting on the thing of like, wait a minute, like, are we going to let them do this? This is okay. We're going to let them have this level of control over stuff. Like, we're not going to kill them. And so, yeah, I mean, and once we got past that, like looking at that, like it as the team that I lead, of course I wanted it. Like it's absolutely, I'm doing the same stuff you guys are doing every day. And absolutely, it was a no-brainer for me. Our biggest question was always, okay, how do we, like, what's security team going to think of this? What's compliance going to think of this? And now we, as of the past several months here, dealing with that on a daily basis, we know exactly what they think of it. And we've done a lot of explaining of why it's okay and why the production industry is okay with OSC passing back and forth, and why it is safe and reliable. Yeah.
Yeah, it was, we built lots of hardware interfaces and everything else for Hangouts using the plugin that it had years ago. And so we had a sense of like the kind of shows that we could build when we were using an API. And OSC was so much more than that. I felt like that elf queen in Lord of the Rings, like with this ring, like we could take over the world. And so and that was with when Zoom OSC was outside of it. And so we're super excited about what we can do with it. Next question.
Next one comes from Georgie Kennedy Jr. here in Washington, D.C. Is the Zoom team focused on what Apple is doing with the Silicon M1 chips? Zoom ISO has been able to take advantage of the new architecture.
Brendan?
Yeah. So in terms of every technology that comes out, whether it's, new silicon, GPUs, new processing capabilities, our engineers are always looking at how we can push the limits of the technology, leveraging what's out there. So we definitely have engineers that are looking at what the new capabilities are and how we can further optimize Zoom for individuals that are using that latest cutting edge technology, but at the same time looking at how we can ensure compatibility across the entire platform for whatever device someone's using so that it is a uniform experience across the product.
Next question.
Next one comes from Rupert McRae. He's back from Dallas, Texas, with during Zoomtopia, future Zoom webinar backstage and production studio features were announced. How are these features coming along, and will the liminal technologies flow into these workflows?
Sam, do you have anything to?
I'm actually going to toss this one to Brendan.
Brendan?
So there's a lot of exciting things happening with those features that we announced at Zoomtopia. And so definitely folks should stay tuned for more updates on them. They are progressing and we're very excited about what we're seeing internally, but those are all features of the platform. And part of our goal has been to make the platform open and make features available across the platform. So with Liminal joining the team and their technology, we'll look at how that integrates across all these options to really create amazing workflows for individuals. And naturally, we're always looking for feedback. And as we hear that feedback and as we release these features, we'll continue to iterate and evolve them.
Next question.
David Brady is up next from New York City, and David says, as Zoom, OSC, and ISO have demonstrated a desire for clean output, are there any considerations for a truly clean stream out via custom RTMP?
Another great question there. It is something that we're definitely taking input on that to see what the use cases are and what are the best ways to service this community. Naturally, we added NDI support for Zoom rooms as one way to give clean streams out. Another thing that we recently released is with our Zoom SDK, there is now an ability to get clean streams out of the SDK using a new method to access the media. And that was something that just released last week. So we're listening to the feedback and constantly offering new things. So we love hearing your use cases so we can look at how that can get integrated into the product and where that fits onto our roadmap and all the different use cases.
That's great. Next question.
Next one comes from Guy Cochran. He's back from Seattle with, in the future, what could you see the maximum number of NDI outputs being achieved with a Zoom room or Zoom ISO?
Is there a limit?
I think that with Zoom ISO, one of the things that we talked a lot about was density, right? And that's one of the things that was a symptom of the pinning farms, right? Where that was a very low density solution. If you had a laptop, you were getting one person. If you hooked up an external screen to it, okay, now your density is 2 per computer. So you want to have a panel of 24, well, now you need 12 laptops. One of the things that we looked at with Zoom ISO was how do we we know that at large scale, we're probably going to need multiple computers just from a decoding perspective, right? So, but we then tried to figure out, what is the maximum density we can achieve? And then what computers can we achieve that on? One of the most popular support ticket questions is, hey, I have an M1 Mac Mini, how many outputs am I going to get? Because you're looking at this really cool synergy where as a unit of computing, it was really cost effective for producers to be picking that up. And then they're looking at, okay, well, how far can I then push that with Zoom ISO? And then of course, as we added things that ran natively on Apple Silicon, like NDI5, we were able to increase, and make that more efficient. Obviously, there's architectural components to this as well, to the Zoom platform and how it allocates bandwidth to, individual endpoints that we're going to have to consider as we look at how this scales up to a platform-wide option. But endpoint density is a top of mind consideration for me as I'm thinking about, what makes an effective solution for remote contribution.
Yeah, go ahead, Greg.
I just wanted to follow up and ask if there was a technical reason for the 3-pin limit in Room NDI.
So in terms of that, we released it with the 3-pin initially to balance system performance with output based off of what we saw from a number of initial folks that were running it. Naturally, with time and as we hear feedback, we're constantly looking at what the performance is on those systems and looking at if it makes sense to adjust those numbers and change that functionality. So we have definitely heard from the community that more outputs would be better, and it's something that we're looking at.
Next question.
Lois Richter's up next from Davis, California. And Lois, to the Liminal reps specifically, what was Liminal created to do? And what have customers used it for up to now? And to the Zoom reps here in the meeting, after Liminal is part of Zoom, will the current customers still be able to use Liminal?
Go ahead and start with Andy.
Yeah. So from Liminal's side of this question, what was it created to do? It was created in response to the pandemic destroying the livelihoods of my friends and colleagues in the entertainment industry, where suddenly all of these shows that were in progress, artists that were working on them were out of work, and they needed a method by which they could still be creative in remote production, right? A lot of readings and things like that were, okay, maybe we can take a gallery view and scrape it into OBS and bring that out to stream. But there was so much design potential left on the table, right? We had lighting designers, costume designers, people who started to look at this platform as even a filmic process. And so the first thing that I did with the Zoom SDK was create a way to cut very quickly with a keyboard who was seen on screen at a given time. So you take, we did this with Bard's production of Mad Forest, where the director, Ashley Tata, had like 300 cuts that she wanted in given scenes and things like that. Things that you could never do by finding the name on a list and then clicking spotlight. It was to the syllable of a line that they needed precision in terms of how fast they could spotlight. Sometimes spotlighting multiple times in a given sentence to show reaction shots and things like that. So I created Zoom OSC as a way to take what I knew, which was Isadora and workflows like that in the theater, queuing systems like QLab, then take a way to then point that at Zoom and say, okay, now I need Zoom to behave as though it was a console or appliance or an instrument in a theatrical scenario. So that was the impetus. And we took that and created a production company around that concept. We were doing shows for all sorts of different clients that were looking at using the Zoom platform for remote contribution with a particular focus on the arts. So a lot of academic theaters, a lot of creative works, album debuts, things like that, that were very focused on compositing or using the Zoom platform in a creative way. Then we generalized that solution about a year ago and created it for events in general. So we expanded our OSC API. We brought Zoom OSC to a sort of a wider base with the official Mac OS release. We brought Zoom ISO out as individual contributors, was really the bedrock foundation for being able to composite your own production, even, creative space all the way up through professional productions that are using, constellations or vMix or stuff like that. It was sort of a common thread that we knew was needed. So what did we actually do? Well, I think we were part services company, part software company, and we called the company Liminal because we were bridging the two. It was somewhere in that in-between liminal space between the two disciplines that we felt was really synergistic to offering something valuable in the midst of this pandemic.
Jonathan, did you think you would end up in this position from when you started?
Definitely not. But I think our evolution has been a good one. So just like what Andy said there, we were constantly thinking about the next step. We were constantly looking at the capabilities of Zoom and the tools surrounding us. And Andy and I have just been consistently just talking about what is needed, what's the ideal, and that changed over time. A year and a half ago, we thought that the solution might be something more of a direct one-to-one streaming and might be something more RTMP based. We had all these different considerations, and we we didn't go those routes. We very specifically and carefully chose what is the most efficient path forward, investing in Zoom OSC and really building it out from a utility that had some minor functions into something that could do everything. And then Zoom ISO was on our radar for a long time. We knew that ISO output was necessary. It really would elevate past what people could do with Zoom OSC automating the pins. They needed to have the ISO video outputs, and they needed the NDI and the SDI outputs. That's critical to integrating into a larger infrastructure. So we were always thinking about what the next step was, and I think that's been a great guiding philosophy for us and allowed us to really move forward. Even though I spent a lot of my time working in services for a variety of clients, whether it's Zoom related or even not Zoom related, those services were always with the understanding that we were trying to figure out what's the direction for our products and how should our software advance and even what new software should we develop. So even today, we have a lot of new ideas of what to do beyond Zoom ISO, what to do going forward. So I'm looking forward to pursuing that path.
And it seems like it's only going to accelerate. You have more hooks. So and Brendan, I think we already touched on it, but I'll let you finish it off. That it's only liminal customers don't have anything to worry about.
Exactly. So the software is still available, and our goal is to bring this technology into the platform. So really the goal here is about enablement and making it even easier to access this technology to help improve everyone's workflow. So we're really excited about what we'll be able to do together and just further improve the capabilities of the platform for the community.
Yeah. Next question.
Rupert McCrae is up next from Dallas, Texas, and he says, what advice would you give to other app developers wanting to integrate with the Zoom platform?
I'll take that one, or maybe first, and then as someone on the outside, and then I'll toss it to you, Brendan. But I can say as somebody who worked with it, don't be afraid to ask questions. Like, holy cow, like Zoom is so responsive on all sorts of issues and thoughts that it's so easy to don't be afraid. Just because it's a large company, it really has a small business vibe when it comes to how the developers are treated and cared for and how conversations take place. And then to be thorough, read through the documentation. Obviously, it's a good first step, but then don't be afraid to try things. I think the way that the Zoom SDK is set up, it's really designed to be sort of almost like a choose your own adventure way of figuring out how you want to traverse it. And there's so many different ways to figure out the workflow that you're looking for, because they have such a wide variety of options for developers through the APIs, the SDKs, the video SDKs, all of that. And then even, looking at how OSC fits into some of that stuff as well. There's so many points of entry for a developer looking to look into the platform. So I'd start and just look at, what's the landscape of Zoom development as a whole? What do you want to do? Then find the package that works best for you, and then start to engage with the support advocates to get a sense of what would make sense for you.
Go ahead, Brendan.
No, 100% what Andy said, in that it's really diving in. Our goal with the SDK has been to make, our entire platform available to meet the workflow that you want to achieve. So it's really diving in. We have an entire developer advocacy team that is there to help support, and a great community there in our dev forum. So really, don't hesitate to reach out to the forum, engage with that community, and we're constantly listening. So based off of the feedback that we're hearing there, if there's something that we don't have in the platform, that's what we look at. How do we add that to our roadmap? What are those use cases? And so just highly encourage folks to engage with it and engage with our community, because we're so excited to hear what you're building and how we can help encourage and support folks that are building on our platform.
Next question.
Comes from Georgie Kennedy Jr. in Washington, D.C. He's back with, will we potentially see a Windows version of Zoom ISO in 2022?
George, do you want to add something to that before Andy?
Yes. So much of 2021 we've been pushing the cloud workflow and somewhat of the limits. And I just wanted to see where Liminal and Zoom is as far as, it's a big part of the contribution engine. So I wanted to see if we're going to see that in the cloud. Well, with just a Windows version, and obviously most of us are using it in the cloud.
Not sure who wants to jump on that answer there. Go ahead, Andy.
I can give some color from the Liminal side, and that I totally understand, where you're at, George, and that the cloud is also top of mind for me as well. And I know that Windows is a core component of that. I think that there's a lot of progress being made already at Zoom at how the cloud ties into production workflows, and I think you're going to see that become more important, across the entire industry, because that's a global trend, that we're talking about here. And I think that I totally understand why Windows is an important component of that, and have been thinking about that for a while at Liminal. And we've talked about that before, about what are the things that we would need in order to look at something like that. And in the horizon of having all these expanded options, it's something that I'm certainly thinking about.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next, and Douglas says, what will happen to Streamweaver as a part of the Liminal acquisition, and is there a future for the product under Zoom ownership?
Go ahead, Andy.
All of our technology, I think, has the ability to synergize well with the Zoom platform. Obviously, what was different about Streamweaver was that it wasn't an SDK application; it was a remote control application. And we don't have any updated guidance on Streamweaver today. It's something that we're still figuring out exactly how we want to approach that as we move forward. But I think the concept of it, which was that I could do something on my side that affects something on your side as a workflow. Again, going back to the workflow, that is an area where there's tons of possibility. I mean, and you can just imagine what that would look like. You've probably talked about some of it on the show today already, right? Like there's all sorts of things that if I could just reach through my screen. That was the thing with Streamweaver. It was always that, like, if I could just get in there and just touch that thing, and that's why we built Streamweaver, to solve that. And I think that is a sort of a ubiquitous production consideration. And so as we're thinking about workflows that affect production, a lot of those ideas, I think, will continue to crop up.
Yeah, and I know that for us, as we design the new kits, I know it's got probably 20 or so kits that we send out for Zoom events. Almost everything's remote controllable, but not everything. And we see Streamweaver as how we're going to add the last controls over the lights, over a handful of bits of hardware, and so on and so forth. So in a way that doesn't require VPNs and all the other things that we've required in the past. Next question.
Next one comes from Daniel Goldstein in Baltimore, Maryland, and he says, any plans to make Zoom more manipulable for all cloud productions? For example, an AWS VPC with meeting connector, OSC control of a headless system with ISO audio and video, with the choice to provide our own AV mix minus to each attendee for maximum control.
Andy?
I think, again, that the cloud is a critical part of the production workflow, and I think it's something that that you've been heard on, in terms of like that, this is something that we are aware is critical to the next steps of scalable production, because it allows you to spin up and spin down infrastructure on an event by event basis. It allows you to be more impervious to terrestrial conditions and things like that. Obviously, it's not perfect; it has its own issues that can come up from time to time, but we know that it's a critical part of what producers are looking at right now. So it's definitely a top of mind consideration. The question is just how we're going to do it.
Next question.
James Hutchinson is up next from Dublin, Ireland. Congrats to Andy and team at Liminal. Your wonderful products and support since the start of this pandemic have enabled the creative community to bring people together in fabulous new ways. As a part of Zoom, will the impoverished still have access?
Brendan, do you want to talk to that at all?
Happy to, and I'm sure Andy might have a few thoughts here as well. So, naturally, the liminal technology will still be available, and our goal here is to add this to the Zoom platform. And naturally, with Zoom, we want to make our communication technology available globally to everyone to help build those connections. So definitely, we are looking at ways of ensuring this technology and these features are available for folks to help empower their workflows and empower their business. And that's always been a driving force within Zoom. Andy, I don't know if you have anything else you want to add.
I think, and it's so true what you're saying there, Brendan, because across the board, I think Zoom is showing that accessibility is both, economic accessibility, global in terms of region accessibility, those are priorities, and the platform shows that in a lot of ways. I think we took a similar stance with Zoom OSC and Zoom ISO. Like the majority of Zoom OSC's API is free. It's really those niche and high end programmer based workflows that where we started to introduce a monetized model. But the majority, like you could download it right now and you could set up with a free trial of Isadora and the free version of Zoom OSC. You could build a pinning machine and all sorts of stuff that would be really effective for your workflow. And get a lot of data out of that and really start to build a foundation. And again, we did our entire 2020 production stint with academic theaters and people who were, I think, financially constrained in a real way because of the pandemic. And none of the functionality that we deployed during that year was put behind a paywall when we introduced the pro version of Zoom OSC. So an entire, production cycles were, all of the summer and the fall of 2020, all those shows were built upon our free tools. And then we built the paid tools as sort of the next level up for people who are doing really high scale production who need a lot of additional infrastructure. But it's always top of mind. How do we make this accessible? Because it's not just that it's like a chip on your shoulder, good thing to do. That is a wonderful community to get information back from. There's value there, and it's investing in the arts and other communities, regardless of what their resource allocation is, always has positive externalities up the chain that affect the platform. So I think it's not just something we do for clout or for just to say we did it. It has so many upstream possibilities for the platform that transforms the situation for everybody.
And the gateway the gateway of being able to do 40 minutes on your own without having to pay for it, I think, is one of the reasons Zoom exploded during when everything really hit the fan. It was really this was the easiest, quickest way to get in touch with other people, and made it all possible. So I think that I'm excited to see what happens next. Sam?
Well, I was just going to say that I had been reading ahead on the questions a little bit earlier during the first hour, and I saw this one, and I was hoping that Brendan was going to point out something he said in that earlier answer when we were talking about compute power and how, like, as we're constantly trying to find things that can use the latest and greatest tech as it comes out, we're keeping in mind the lesser tech that may be available in other parts of the world, in other communities, in places where, like, in education right now, there's a question coming up on education in a bit, but in education, everyone's asking us, like, okay, but we need all the features that Zoom has, and we need them to work on a Chromebook. And how much of a focus that Zoom is putting on that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question.
Comes from Greg Gibson in Washington, D.C. Thanks for the recent update to the Zoom Room web controller to support NDI pins. Finally, now we can get NDI support inside the breakout rooms to make, can we get the NDI support inside the breakout rooms to make the room NDI complete?
Who wants to jump on that one?
So this is a great feature request, and naturally we will be continuing to add features on our NDI support within the platform. So I'm very excited, what the year has ahead for the workflows, and naturally hearing about what use cases this community has and what they'd like from the platform, because that really helps inform our roadmap. So stay tuned for more on that. Andy, I don't know if you've got a little bit more to add to that one as well.
The only thing I'll say on that is that, you all have a man in Havana now. Like you all, in terms of like Zoom's ability to hear what is important to production. I think that this joining of Zoom from Liminal is an opportunity not only to bring over specific products or even specific workflow ideas about how things are done, but I know that for Jonathan and myself, it's a priority to keep our ear close to the ground and to continue to understand, what this community needs so that we can then be forces that advocate inside of Zoom for the changes that you're looking to see. It's always, I think, from all my interactions with Zoom, it's always any request or idea has been met with a spirit of, okay, let's figure out how to do it. With other companies you work with, sometimes you see like, oh, that's going to be hard. I don't want to do that, or that's not strategically important to us. I've never had Zoom dismiss a concept because it didn't align with someone's availability or something like that. They always hear, they always listen, they always look to deploy. And so what I'm excited about now is to be on the inside, to be able to then provide, okay, we know very specifically, like these are the top dozen things that you guys are looking for right now inside the platform. How can we be forces of change inside of Zoom to be able to help make that possible where we can? Obviously taking in all the external factors that we have to, leverage against, but we're here to be advocating for a lot of the things that we believe in about production, which align very closely with the office hours production of mentality, which is why, I was saying earlier that this is a validation not only of like what we had been doing, but of what this group is doing. The idea that Zoom has a place in high-end production workflow, that's validated through this transaction that we're doing with Zoom right now. And we're going to use that leverage, to your advantage for sure.
And I'm excited about even transcending the idea of breakout rooms, of really looking at what I see when I see Liminal going into Zoom is the possibility of dynamically organizing people based on a need that is completely in the system, but being able to decide, okay, we're going to have 1,000 people, now 5, and I said this before, and not really thinking about breakout rooms as much as grouping, and being able to do that instantly, I think is I don't know if it's not possible right now, but in my head it works. Next question.
Next one comes from James Hutchinson in Dublin, Ireland, and he says, at Brendan Ittelson Zoom, have you ever seen a Zoom panel look and sound so good?
No, this is a absolutely amazing panel, and I definitely have appreciated seeing office hours and everything that everyone is doing here. Quality is definitely top notch.
Thanks. All right, next question.
All right, moving on. Greg Kurdar from Stavanger, Norway says, are there any Zoom features in development aimed at educators to increase the effectiveness of online classes?
Go ahead, Sam.
Yeah. So on this one, I don't think, I think at this point you're getting the feeling that we're not going to come here and just tell you, oh, we have all these features coming out. This isn't how we leak that sort of information. But I just want to, what we have been talking about here is focuses and where you can see what we're looking at and what we're doing. And so I'm just going to talk about immersive scenes, about focus mode, about slide control, about shares from second cameras and the ability to use dot cams, and all the features that you've seen us really target education. Expect to see more.
Yeah, I think it's exciting. I think that there's going to be a lot of opportunity in the next couple of years. I mean, we're changing the way we do education across the board, from K through, professional. Next question.
Greg Gibson of Washington, D.C. is up next. He says, regarding the Zoom events business, many have been concerned that Zoom intends to compete for end-user production services against production houses and small producers like many in the audience here. Is that a valid concern?
Sam?
Yeah, I'll take this one. You've heard me say it before. You heard it earlier today in the call where Alex pointed out like the scalability of that's not our intent. Our intent is to make customers successful. One of the ways we make customers successful is by directly providing event services to them. Another way we make customers successful is by empowering groups like you and producers like you to really be able to use our products. If you look at the scale of Zoom in our business versus the scale of our professional services are growing massively, but our goal is success, is customer success. And ultimately we get that by the Zoom platform being out there, being useful, being powerful, and being able to do everything that the creative minds here in this room want it to do.
I think it's super useful for a company to be doing their own, dog fooding their own platform. There's no way for them to know how to do this without using it themselves. And so I think it's really important that exists in the system. Yeah, go ahead, Andy.
And I think it's also the worst kept secret ever, right? Like when it comes to like for our side of things, like how we do production, like I wouldn't have sat and done months of Isadora labs and trainings about how to control Zoom with Isadora if that was like designed to be a competitive model for us, like against you guys. It's us together, right? It's us creating a sector as a collective and sharing what we know about each other. I mean, that was so fundamental to what we were doing at Liminal. So as you see, the integration of some of what we were doing on the services side with event services, I think you should look at it from the perspective of we're out here trying to figure it out and then work together about how to be successful doing these types of things. And I'd encourage you to look back on a lot of the things that we talked about how we do some of that so that you can build up and we can have a conversation with a shared vocabulary about how we think about decentralized production.
Good, Greg.
Yeah, as Sam mentioned earlier, he and I have had this conversation before. And so, Sam, I just want to let you know I'm not really dense. I was just kind of throw you a softball here and kind of let you clear that up on the record for everybody.
That's what I figured.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that I'm hoping that we're going to continue to see just a really great synergy between our group and Zoom and the Liminal team, because I think that there's an incredible synergy of us figuring out, and we're very much at the very point of the outer edge, given that we're streaming an HDR feed right now in 4K to YouTube, and we plan to move this to terrestrial broadcasting, all still sitting on the Zoom platform. And so I think that I'm excited as someone who produces these events for that what we can do with this team. I think it's going to be the last question of the hour. Go ahead. Next.
Okay, it comes from Alex Gollner in London, and Alex says, what will Andy Carluccio's office hours be at Zoom?
I'm still figuring out the new normal, having only started this week in terms of how, what that schedule is going to look like. But I will say this, and on a serious note, that what we did at Liminal was informed by our engagement directly with the customer. And I say customer almost laughingly because it never felt like a customer relationship that we had with anybody who was using our products. I am, that is still a core tenet to me. Understanding directly, what are the users using it for, and what do they need, and what are the points of friction, and then how many things, being able to walk the walk was one thing. Can I actually, with the tools available to me, put something together and actually produce it and understand it? I think you have to be able to do that to be a good developer and understand, what the customer is doing by walking that walk yourself. But then also saying, okay, my narrow experience of how it's used is not representative of all the use cases, and we want to support all of those. So I've seen people do things with Zoom OSC that I never even imagined, somebody would be able to do, and same with Zoom ISO as well. So to me, keeping an ear to the ground, how that's specifically organized to be determined, but that is a core tenet of, I think, just now who I am as a person. So I think that I'm going to try to bring that to my work at Zoom and continue to build with you all in mind.
I just want to thank all of you for your time. Just really an incredible opportunity to have Andy and Jonathan and Brendan and Sam. Thank you so much for spending an hour with us and answering these questions. We just think you're the super team for this idea. And I think that it's just an incredible combination of folks that we're super excited to see where this goes, and hopefully we'll be able to persuade you to come back and give us some updates every once in a while. We would really love to have you. The invitation's opened. We're going to probably bug you about that sometime. But we're excited about where it's going to go. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
And thanks to our producers for an excellent set of questions. Sorry we didn't get to more of them. There were so many. so there was. Thank you for the incredible interest. Thanks for the first hour and second hour questions, and thank you to the panelists, this host of panelists that showed up today. It was really great to see all of you. So thanks for joining us, and a reminder that we'll talk about Office Hours 2.0 tomorrow, and what we've solved, what we still have to solve, etc. And then, of course, some of the previews for what we think is going to happen on Friday, and then education on Saturday. All right. We'll see you soon. Now we're going to jump into After Hours for another 21 hours of discussion on